Overnight, it's been quieter in Kiev. On the central square, we haven't seen the same kind of awful violence that we saw on Thursday morning when snipers were firing into the crowd and dozens of protesters were killed. But we have seen an intensification in recent hours of diplomatic efforts to solve this crisis. President Viktor Yanukovych held talks into the early hours with European Union foreign ministers from France, Germany and Poland, and with opposition leaders and a Russian representative. The president this morning announced on his website that some kind of agreement had been reached to potentially end the crisis in Ukraine. But it's very unclear whether there actually is an agreement or whether this is more a kind of offer from the president of things that he's prepared to accept. He made his statement apparently without having fully agreed things either with the EU ministers or with opposition leaders in Ukraine. So we're still waiting to see whether this agreement can work or not, and there are a lot of doubts surrounding it. All of this is taking place, of course, against the background of very serious geopolitical tensions between the EU and the US on one side and Russia on the other. The EU and US are very much backing the opposition and putting pressure on President Yanukovych to settle with the opposition and to give ground. And the kind of settlement I think that would be needed to end this situation would be early elections very soon, a new government and constitutional changes that would cut the president's powers and boost those of the parliament, returning to an earlier constitution which Ukraine had in place before 2010. But the Russians are siding very much with the government, with Mr. Yanukovych, and are blaming protesters for having escalated the violence on Thursday. And there have been a number of public statements from Russian officials suggesting that Mr. Yanukovych should use force to crush these protests and should reassert his authority. So we have a real East-West clash with echoes of the Cold War, in fact, in this situation here in Kiev. Russia is playing, in my mind, a very questionable role in the situation here. I think it's not helpful for Russia to be suggesting to Mr. Yanukovych that he should crush the protests. There have been rumors, all unconfirmed, of course, that there are Russian agents on the ground trying to destabilize the situation. Some eyewitnesses have claimed that the snipers who fired on the crowd yesterday were Russian, that they were heard speaking Russian in Russian accents. Of course, we have no confirmation of that. But there is video footage that exists which appears to show snipers shooting in both directions, first at protesters and then at police, making it look as if this was an effort to stir up the situation, to instigate violence, violence which could then be used as a pretext to bring in the army or Interior Ministry troops to crush the protests. So the role of Russia, very questionable. We're also looking closely at Crimea, which used to be a part of Russia until it was handed over to Ukraine in the 1950s, when it was, if you like, an administrative move within the Soviet Union. Now, of course, Ukraine is an independent country, but Crimea has close ties to Russia. Crimea has indicated if the situation worsens in Ukraine, then it might try and secede from Ukraine, which could be a very dangerous development. Neil Buckley, Financial Times, Ukraine.